Hi, I'm Kyle Abraham, Artistic Director of AIM by Kyle Abraham, and I'm also the endowed professor in residence here at the Gloria Kaufman School of Dance.
And you're about to have a really big week in Los Angeles because you're about to have two pieces in the same week at two venues, and which is what we're here to talk about. Why don't you tell us what that week entails for you and what those two pieces are?
Sure, yeah. First performance will be on February 15th here at the USC campus in the Bovard Auditorium, a work called An Untitled Love. It's all set to the music of D'Angelo, really honoring just love in a lot of ways and honoring not only my parents, who are no longer with us, but also those aunts and uncles that helped raise me. And then on the 18th, I come to your beautiful theater, the Soraya Theater, and present a work of ours called Requiem, Fire in the Air of the Earth, which is my kind of take on Mozart's Requiem, but through the lens of electronic composer Jay Lin.
Before we move on to Requiem, because I really want to talk about that and,
Sure, of course.
Give our audience a chance to sort of understand that piece and its provenance and what it means to respond to Mozart's Requiem. But let's just talk a little bit more about you. You seem to be spending a little bit more time in Los Angeles. You've always had a tether to our great city here, but what does Los Angeles mean to your work and this chapter of your life?
You know, I love Los Angeles for so many reasons. Not only do I find it to be a great place for me to recharge, both through teaching in an academic institution, but also just the way of life here in Los Angeles. But along with that, I get time to research. So I get some time to kind of process, find different films, books, etc. Go to the museums because they're not overcrowded here, and take in a lot of different possibilities for inspiration in the work.
I know this to be true because I see you in the lobby of theaters around town as well, so you're taking in work. I've seen you in the lobby of our theater, yes. So I appreciate that about you. And AIM, I want to talk about AIM for a minute. I think AIM's been around for 16 years.
Oh my God.
Something like that.
I'm only 17, so.
So you started it very young, but it's been around for a while.
It's been around for a good while. I started the company when I was in graduate school, NYU, and our big breakthrough came in 2010 when we made a work called The Radio Show, which in LA we performed at the Red Cat back, and I think it was 2011 is the year we did it at Red Cat.
Couple years after that, something kind of, I would say, really important happened to you, but you're going to be all humble about it maybe, but you received the very prestigious MacArthur Fellowship.
Yes, I did, and it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. It's also interesting thinking about myself and Mark Morris, being two of the younger people to have received that award, but thinking a little bit of like the imposter syndrome. I'm like, do they really mean to give this to me? Am I worthy? And ironically, it's one of those things that one of the ways I found peace with it was thinking about how much I am involved in our community as a dance community, how many shows I go to, and how much I'd like to think I'm supportive of my colleagues and my peers and the people that I've looked up to for years. And I'd like to think that the work that I do honors a lot of their legacy.
Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead a couple years to the pandemic. Every organization like AIM, every artist like you, met the moment that we thought would never happen, which is the whole world ceased having performances. And, I think some people made stuff in their living rooms and, studios, a little harder for dancers, but you took advantage of the moment, and I'm really impressed by that. So tell us what you did during the pandemic.
Oh, Lord.
You and your company, both.
Yeah, oh my God, there's so many works. There's still works that people haven't seen that we made during the pandemic, but there's these two evening-length works, An Untitled Love and Requiem, Fire in the Air of the Earth, that both premiered in 2021. Along with that, and I guess over the course of 2020 and 2021, we tried to find ways in which we could set up residency opportunities, those kind of bubble residencies, where we're tested quite regularly and can't really come in contact with anyone else over the course of that creative period. But we also made a work called Our Indigo, If We Were a Love Song, which premiered at American Dance Festival in North Carolina, but we performed it at Fall for Dance in New York and actually at LACMA just last year. And what else? There's been so many other pieces, I can't even think of all of them. Motor Rover, which is a work that hasn't been performed on stage yet, but it will later in the year. But it's a duet that was commissioned by Baryshnikov Art Center and the Merce Cunningham Trust. Mm-hmm. And It was a work made in response to Merce's work, Land Rover.
So you did these bubble residencies, but did you also do some work like in your living room? What is that like when you have a screen in front of you and all your dancers are in remote locations? Because I think you kept your dancers working.
Yes, we did. And a lot of that, is due to Sadie Liggett-Dennis, our executive director, and just all the hard work that she put in to make sure everyone could pay their bills during that time. But what I tried to figure out how to do was, as someone who is not the biggest fan of Zoom, I had to find other ways to engage and keep us working in some way. And so for me, a lot of that time was spent on Fridays. We would have talks every Friday with the dancers and myself and our rehearsal director. We would talk about just things that seemed pertinent to the work at the time, and obviously talking about what they were experiencing at the time in the early stages of the pandemic in particular. A lot of those conversations had to do with maybe film viewings that were recommended over the course of several weeks. Each dancer would recommend a film or a TV show or a reading, and we would talk about that for a couple hours.
So I understand your dancers are on contract 52 weeks a year. How many dance companies are able to do that? Not very many, I think, is the answer to that question. Of course, the really big ballet companies.
They're not even 52 weeks, ironically. Yeah. It's interesting because they have those long layoffs.
So you are really unique in this manner. And I will say our last resident company, right now Ballet BC from British Columbia is our resident company. Before that it was Aspen Santa Fe Ballet. Aspen Santa Fe Ballet had their dancers on for 52 weeks a year, which is one of the reasons why I made them a resident dance company, because I wanted to support them supporting dancers, and I hope we can do a little bit of that to help you as well. But that is such a commitment to them as artists, as people, and it's not easy to do. Tell me, how long have you been doing that?
Since the MacArthur, it's been, even before then, I guess you could say, it's been this interesting journey to find ways to support the company. From the early stages when I was using my food stamps that I needed to pay for our per diem, I would just buy our groceries and we would just eat together and cook together. From there, going to a place where I could provide stipends for all the dancers, either for rehearsal or performance, and then being able to afford both of those things, to then an hourly wage, to then where we're at now with salaries, but also salaries with full health care benefits and a retirement plan and workers' compensation and massage credits when we travel too long, or if you're on a stage that doesn't support a dancer's body. All of those things have happened over the course of time, and I'm really, really grateful for a wonderful executive director who helps with that leadership, and a development team as well that help really support the funds to make that possible for the dancers and myself.
It's incredible. What an incredible story to start from you generously sharing your food stamps with your company to where the company is today. That's incredible. And now you're not with the company every day because you're choreographing everywhere. A number of major pieces just since the pandemic. And then of course you're here in Los Angeles teaching and apparently stopping by some museums and some other theaters to get inspiration. Did you have a moment where you had to kind of like pull yourself away from that day-to-day interaction with the company? Do you sometimes feel like you miss being with them? Even
when I'm here working, I still feel guilty if I don't respond to but so many emails in a day. And it takes a lot of me saying over and over again that I am not available on like Mondays in particular because I teach all day. But the work is still happening and still needs to get done. So it's that type of navigation and negotiation. But in the same vein, when I go to set a work at the Royal Ballet or New York City Ballet or Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater or any of these companies, I try my best when I'm with those companies to be very present and then try to figure out how to best fit in time to answer questions for my staff as best as possible. But a lot of the times it becomes a thing where I just say, can you just send me like a long email of all the things you need, and I'll just find the time to sit and answer each thing as best I can. But the space away actually, I'd like to think is helpful for the process and for me to learn new things in new spaces, learning new things when I'm working with the students here at USC, learning new things when I'm working with these other companies, and then coming back to AIM with different information and different sources of inspiration to bring into the room. We're going to start to segue toward Requiem.
Okay.
this is one of the things you're known for. I wouldn't, if, there's 10 more salt and sweet and salty, is the breadth, the diversity of the works, the, if I can, the style of movement, the form of movement, the music. You are, no one could pin you down, at least not at this point in your career. So tell us a little bit about that as it relates to Requiem, because there are, there's a lot, it's a deep, rich, textured, layered piece. So give us a sense of all the pieces that go into that.
There's so many different entry points for me thinking about movement and the making process that went into Requiem, Fire in the Air, the Earth. And I think a lot of it had to do with coming from a work like An Untitled Love, where the majority of the choreography was generated from my body, to then going into Requiem and trying to find directives for the dancers or different task-based activities to generate movement that allowed those works to kind of be as separate from one another as possible and have their own identities, and giving different prompts to the dancers to generate that material. In most cases with that work, there's maybe a handful of phrases that I made from my body. In other cases, it would be directives, or even saying things to a dancer like, okay, now that you've made this variation, let's have Thor come in and mutate that phrase. And what would that look like? And playing with ideas like that helped the work to continue to kind of grow and evolve over time in a way that you still sing my voice, but it adds new texture, new nuance, and new voices into the whole kind of ensemble.
So you also had, though, another collaborator, and I want to hear about how that came to be. And did that were they parallel collaborations? Did one happen before the other? When did you decide to take Mozart and put it in the hands of a really incredible musician?
Initially, when John Nakagawa from the Mostly Mozart Festival at Lincoln Center reached out to me, he had asked me if I would ever consider making something to Mozart's music at all. This was shortly after he saw a work of mine called Pavement. And I really started thinking about Mozart's music, and I think, of course, being the downer that I can be, I was drawn to the Requiem. But the kind of addition of Jay Lin into the picture actually came from a conversation with John, where he said that he didn't think we would be performing with live music. And I'm like, well, for him, perform with live music, we gotta switch this up. We gotta, let's do a little something with it. And Jay Lin instantly came to mind for me. I've loved her music for years, and it really sparked this other important puzzle piece to this work. Like, how was my Requiem going to be different from all the others that came before it? And one of the ways that I thought I'd approach it, especially with her music in particular, was thinking about ideas of reincarnation or afterlife, or even going into not only different kind of folklores and mythology, but also ideas of Black futurism. And I felt like that created a great kind of groundwork and foundation for us to kind of create, and for my other collaborators like Dan Scully, who has been a longtime lighting and scenic design collaborator of mine for years, and Giles Deacon, who's doing the costumes, who I first collaborated with at New York City Ballet for The Runaway several years ago.
When I think of Mozart's Requiem, one of the things I think of is it was an unfinished piece. Mozart died, the piece wasn't finished, it was subsequently finished. There's some mystery about how much Mozart had actually written or not. So I particularly think about the early phrases of that Requiem, and the Kyrie is, of course, one of the most famous, of Mozart's music, among so much famous music. I think about that, and then, who knows at what point during the Requiem it becomes not his anymore. And it sort of just gave you permission to just take it and make it yours. And the whole first section is the Kyrie, and then it ends, and then Jay Lin steps in and takes over. And it literally is a transition moment where you sit back in your seat and you're like, oh, I'm in for something totally different. Tell me a little bit about the conversation with Jay Lin about the sections and what she was supposed to do with Mozart.
Well, sure, but I think I want to address even just what you're saying, right? Because it's a little bit of a good inside scoop, but it's that thing that, like, if you're really familiar with Mozart's Requiem, basically right where we're cutting in is where he finished for the most part. So that was very purposeful. And it's kind of playing with my humor in a way. Just like, I can be a little bit of a geek. So putting those textures in there. And what Jaylin is actually doing, if you're really listening to the way in which she's layering her music and her sound design, is by thinking about how that score would continue to grow and evolve over time. So she's being very purposeful in the kind of direct quotes that she pulls when she pulls them. But ideally, a lot of what she's generating was from some of the material I would have sent to her of the dancers doing different sections, or a lot of the ideas and conversations that we would have over time.
So that was going to be my question. You said, sometimes you create movement in your body, sometimes you give your dancers prompts. It sounds like you did a lot of the latter in creating Requiem. And then I was like, well, what prompts did you give Jaylin? You gave her some of those things you were doing with the dancers to respond to.
In some cases I sent her videos if I had them, but more than not, I just talked to her about the overall themes and kind of let her run wild. I shared the exact recording that I was listening to, just as a source of inspiration, and kind of let her run wild. And she would send me demos. Ironically, during this pandemic time, I was just listening to the demos, and it was hard for me not to start dancing in my kitchen when I was doing the dishes or driving. I'm like, Jaylin, I gotta pull over. These beats are too good. But yeah, that was a really exciting time to just hear what she had created, and know that ironically, it wasn't until we had an opportunity to have a bubble residency where I could actually match any of what she created with the movement.
So you said about these two full-length pieces that we're going to see here in Los Angeles that if they were cinema, one would be a rom-com and one would be sci-fi.
Yeah.
Obviously, Requiem would be sci-fi. Expound upon that, and then I have an observation, but I want to hear you first.
I think An Untitled Love is very much like a Sanaa Lathan rom-com of some kind. And the Requiem for me is very much if Christopher Nolan was asked to make a ballet or a contemporary dance in some way, and infuse that with the producers of BET. I don't know, but they're very different worlds in that way, and I love creating with that kind of different way of approaching a work. And I think, I think with the Requiem, the kind of overarching themes of Black futurism definitely highlight this idea of a science fiction kind of world or landscape in some way.
Well, so when the idea of doing Requiem was first presented to us, and it's post-pandemic, right? Uh-huh. And you immediately go to the dark side of a Requiem coming out of the pandemic, right. Which is not what your piece is really, even though you made it during the pandemic, but it's something quite different. And you just mentioned Afrofuturism, which is something that I think is such an interesting lens onto this work. I'll tell you what I observed.
Yes, bring it.
I just watched Everything Everywhere All at Once last weekend.
Good.
And then I rewatched a video of your piece, and they are perfect companion pieces.
Oh, I love that. That's one of my favorite movies of all time.
They're perfect companion pieces. Because in Requiem, you seem to like bounce between parallel universes. Is it structured kind of in a way that Mozart's Requiem is structured? Because it feels very highly delineated by chapters.
Yes, yeah, it is. That's a great call. And there is obviously, there is a nod or a moment where we come back to the Requiem, but I kind of, in a way that like I'm an extreme kind of Marvel universe fan, I'm thinking about, one of the dancers as Nightcrawler and someone who can kind of like just kind of shoot themselves from one environment to another or some planet to another and make that space. So there's moments where that kind of idea is happening. And when you think about who that kind of character is in our show, in this performance, you'll see Jamal Bowman, but I think about that person as this person that's switching the kind of sound score and the music every time it shifts.
Well, your love of Marvel is evident in the piece. I really think it is. But your, which I think this is, all choreographers probably have some aspiration in this regard, your humanity is also always present in the piece. And, like a Requiem, There's a spiritual component. I want you to talk about that. And then there's also just the reminder of the sort of the delicacy of the human condition. And I think it ends the way I sort of think of Mozart's Requiem ending, with a sense of closure. So talk about those two things. Talk about the spiritual component of the piece. Talk about the humanity of the piece.
Sure. I think one of the big things that drew me to making this work in particular was a lot of my kind of fascination, whether or not it be healthy or not, with death. Having lost both of my parents and still kind of grappling with that. Ironically, my mother passed away the year that I moved to Los Angeles in 2016. And it's something that I'm still struggling with. But making this work, it allowed me to kind of dive into this idea in a totally different way, because it wasn't solely about death, but really the questions that I have about what happens next. Because that's the thing that I'm constantly grappling with. I'm like, is there anything after this? What is it? What is it supposed to be? Are they coming back in the form of something else? Do I not smack that bug that's on my shoulder because it could be a relative? Who knows? Like all of those questions, all of that stuff is what kind of creates this world in a way. All these ideas around what the next could be, and in a way that also relates with not only mythology, Greek mythology perhaps, but also thinking about the Yoruba religions and thinking, okay, well, what would happen if Oshun and Minerva had a conversation? So thinking about someone that's thinking about birth and life, and someone that's thinking about justice and peace and war. What happens if they're in conversation?
There's also a very big, can I say it, sun on stage. The design is
Sun,
a very
moon,
big,
planet.
all the above, right? I mean, there's a little bit of Egyptology,
Yeah.
maybe, am I right?
Sure,
Going on?
yeah.
So you're like pan-spiritual.
All of these ideas around religion and the hereafter come into play, with also the symbolisms that kind of can be evoked when you're thinking about religion.
Humanity. Let's just touch on humanity for a second. But to get there, I'd like to talk about movement, because the piece is filled with a depth and breadth of types of movement. It's almost like some of the dancers are characters,
Right.
almost, right? So talk about what we're going to see in terms of movement, and then how that really ends up being such a human thing. And even though like Afrofuturism, great, the spiritual component's great, but it is such a human piece in the end, I think.
Oh, no, I like to think so too. I mean, I to be honest, I'm still kind of grappling with the ending. Every time I feel like it's a different version. So we'll see. We have a rehearsal here in a few weeks to work on that ending. But I think, yeah, the movement, world, language, etc., is all of the above in a way that I enjoy. You're seeing some of that kind of characterization. You're seeing this love of Marvel, hopefully, in the approach to certain things. You're seeing ballet, you're seeing capoeira, you're seeing contemporary dance. You're seeing all of these different forms come into play in a way that, for me, serves the work and serves the relationships that people are having with one another on stage. But all of the kind of like over-the-topness that we're playing with at a certain point is to then kind of drop that and allow us to support one another.
One of the things I really am drawn to your pieces is you are, whether it's D'Angelo or Jaylin responding to Mozart, you are clearly thinking about music. What's going on inside your, I don't know, earbuds, your head? Do you talk to your dancers a lot about music? Give me the musical universe of Kyle Abraham.
Sure. Well, music is my first love. I started off playing the piano, the French horn, and the cello. The cello was the longest out of all things. And my job while in high school and in college was working at a record store. So I've always had that kind of love for music, especially knowing that music is what got me to dance. Seeing the Joffrey Ballet perform to Prince's music, a program called Billboards. I only went to that show because it had something to do with Prince. So seeing that is what kind of opened my eyes up to dance in a way that went beyond my years spent at raves and at hip hop and house parties over the years. It just opened me up to a whole other different way of moving. So I definitely want to always support and acknowledge music when it serves a purpose, because I think of music as being another kind of character or layer to the overall story. So I try my best to highlight it when I can, and play with how we're introducing it to an audience. When your audience comes to the show on the 18th, they're going to first hear the sounds of just like fire crackling, which also ironically can sound like a record on the record player, just at the end of the record or at the beginning. And I knew that had its similarities, so I was interested in that, while also thinking about music that could have been composed around the same time of Mozart's Requiem, and allowing that to kind of come in a kind of ghostly way. So there's moments where you'll hear little bits of sound that come in and out, aside from that sound of that crackling fire.
This was an awesome conversation. We are so pleased to have you at the Soraya in a couple of weeks.
Thanks.
Thanks for spending Mozart's birthday, a little bit of it, with me today here in the studios of the Gloria Kaufman School of Dance. And just thanks, Kyle. And I hope this is a really big week for Los Angeles to get to see you represented by two pieces. Thanks.
I hope so. I hope they come and see both of these crazy worlds.
Me too.